March 12, 2016 began like any other Saturday in Grand Prairie, Texas. The suburban calm of early evening was shattered at 9:13 p.m. by a 911 call that would expose a horrifying truth behind the facade of an ordinary home. "My girlfriend's daughter. She's not breathing. I don't know what happened. She's been hurting herself, hitting her head. Please send help." The caller was Charles Pfiffer, his voice a calculated performance of panic, masking something far more sinister. Each word he spoke to the emergency dispatcher would later be dissected by investigators, revealing a web of deception that began even in these first, crucial moments. The address he gave led first responders to a modest house in a quiet neighborhood. Behind its unremarkable exterior, 4-year-old Leiliana Wright lay motionless, her small body bearing witness to months of systematic abuse that would shock even the most hardened investigators. As dispatchers attempted to guide Pfiffer through emergency procedures, his responses grew increasingly erratic. His story shifted with each question, a red flag that would later prove crucial to the investigation. In the background, Jerry Quezada, Leiliana's mother, could be heard, her own role in this tragedy still to be uncovered. The first police officers arrived within minutes, followed quickly by paramedics. What they discovered inside that house would haunt them for years to come. The scene defied their worst expectations, a crime scene disguised as a home, where a child's suffering had been hidden in plain sight. Detective Sarah Martinez, a 23-year veteran of child abuse cases, would later testify that in all her years of law enforcement, she had never encountered such calculated brutality. The evidence before her told a story of methodical cruelty, carefully concealed beneath a veneer of suburban normalcy. "In 2 decades of law enforcement, you think you've seen it all," Martinez would later recall. But this case, this level of deliberate, sustained abuse against a child, it was beyond anything in our experience. The immediate evidence painted a grim picture. While Charles Pfiffer's 911 call had suggested an accident or self-injury, the reality confronting investigators told a very different story. The physical evidence, the pattern of injuries, the attempts at concealment, everything pointed to a prolonged campaign of abuse that had finally culminated in tragedy. Within hours, what began as an emergency medical call transformed into something far more sinister, the beginning of a homicide investigation that would uncover systemic failures in child protection and expose a level of cruelty that would shake the entire community of Grand Prairie. This is the story of Leiliana Wright, a 4-year-old girl who deserved protection but found only betrayal, whose death would expose fatal flaws in the systems meant to protect our most vulnerable citizens, and whose legacy would ultimately drive crucial reforms in child protective services. The truth that emerged from that March evening would prove far more horrifying than anyone could have imagined. As investigators began to unravel the events leading to Leiliana's death, they would uncover a pattern of abuse so methodical, so calculated, that it would challenge everything they thought they knew about child abuse cases. On July 12, 2011, Leiliana Wright entered a world that should have protected her. Born in Texas, her early photographs reveal a child with bright eyes and an infectious smile, unaware of the challenges that lay ahead. Those who knew her describe a little girl who found joy in the simplest things, dancing in polka-dot dresses, creating artwork for her grandmother's refrigerator, and dreaming of becoming what she called a ballerina doctor. The first years of Leiliana's life unfolded under the watchful eyes of her paternal grandparents, Elisa and Craig Clakeley. In their home, she found stability and love. Elisa's kitchen became a gallery for Leiliana's artwork, each crayon drawing and finger painting carefully preserved. Here, Leiliana developed her passion for dance, twirling through the living room in whatever costume she could fashion from household items. Her father, Brian Maker, treasured every moment he could spend with his daughter. Though their time together was limited by circumstances, he documented these precious visits with photographs and videos that would later become crucial evidence of the stark contrast between Leiliana's life with him and the horror she endured elsewhere. But beneath the surface of this seemingly normal childhood, trouble was brewing. Jerry Quezada, Leiliana's mother, struggled with addiction issues that dated back to Illinois, where she had already lost custody of her other children. The pattern would repeat itself in Texas, but this time with fatal consequences. The Clakeys saw the warning signs early. They documented their concerns meticulously, photographing unexplained bruises and noting behavioral changes in their granddaughter. Each incident strengthened their resolve to protect Leiliana through proper legal channels. They filed reports with Child Protective Services, both in Texas and Illinois, creating a paper trail that would later expose the system's fatal flaws. During weekend visits with her father and grandparents, Leiliana would show glimpses of her true self, the bright, creative child who loved to sing and dance, but increasingly these visits began revealing troubling signs, changes in her behavior, unexplained fears, and physical marks that didn't match the explanations provided by her mother. In what would be her final Christmas, Leiliana demonstrated the generous spirit that defined her character. After receiving a children's makeup kit, she carefully divided the contents, creating small gifts wrapped in notebook paper for other kids who didn't get presents. This simple act of kindness would later become a testament to the beautiful soul that was lost. Elisa Clakeley, watching her granddaughter's situation deteriorate, fought tirelessly through proper channels. She contacted CPS repeatedly, documented every concerning incident, and pleaded for intervention. Her efforts created a detailed record of systematic failure, reports filed, photos submitted, and desperate calls for help that went unheeded. Despite the growing shadows in her life, Leiliana maintained an extraordinary resilience. Her preschool teachers noted her unfailing kindness toward other children, often sharing her snacks or offering comfort to classmates who were upset. Even as her own world grew darker, she continued to be a source of light for others. In her final months, Leiliana's artwork began telling stories she couldn't verbalize. Her drawings, carefully preserved by her grandmother, showed a progression that child psychologists would later identify as clear signs of trauma. Dark spaces, isolated figures, and chaotic lines that spoke of a child's desperate attempt to process her experience. The last documented visit with her grandparents revealed a child trying desperately to maintain her spirit while living in increasingly dangerous circumstances. Leiliana performed her special dance for her grandmother, twirling in a new dress, her smile masking the bruises that were becoming harder to hide. These moments of joy would stand in stark contrast to what investigators would later uncover, a parallel life of systematic abuse hidden behind closed doors, where a child's spirit was methodically crushed under the guise of discipline. The tragedy of Leiliana Wright lies not just in how she died, but in how every attempt to save her was thwarted by a system that failed to connect the dots until it was too late. The interior of the Grand Prairie home revealed a methodical attempt to conceal evidence. As paramedics moved through the dimly lit house that March evening, their medical training told them one story while the crime scene told another. The washing machine hummed in the background, running a load of bedding. The sharp scent of bleach hung in the air. These weren't the signs of panic, they were calculated attempts to destroy evidence. Following muffled sounds, first responders found Jerry Quezada in a back bedroom, performing what appeared to be CPR on Leiliana. Her movements were mechanical, disconnected, as if going through motions she knew were already futile. The child lay still, dressed in purple pajamas dotted with silver stars, her skin bearing the marks of violence that no accident could explain. The bedroom held its own dark revelations. A closet door stood ajar, its interior dimensions barely large enough for a child to stand. On the floor lay implements of torture, a belt and a bamboo stick, carelessly discarded. Scuff marks on the inside of the door told a story of desperate struggles, of tiny hands fighting against. Medical intervention began immediately, but the paramedics' faces betrayed what their training wouldn't let them voice. Leiliana's body temperature told them she had been gone for some time. Still, they worked with mechanical precision, their movements automatic while their minds grappled with the horror before them. The cardiac monitor's steady tone mocked their efforts. The race to Methodist Dallas Medical Center became an exercise in futile hope. In the harsh fluorescent light of the emergency room, medical staff continued their efforts, but the outcome was predetermined. At 11:08 p.m., the official pronouncement came. The cause of death would later be documented as blunt force trauma to the head and abdomen. Back at the house, the investigation was shifting into high gear. Crime scene technicians moved through each room with deliberate care, their cameras documenting a timeline of terror. Blood evidence contradicted the stories being told in separate interview rooms. Impact patterns spoke of focused violence. A child's backpack, stuffed in the back of the closet, contained a diary with entries that would later bring hardened detectives to tears. The house yielded its secrets methodically. Investigators discovered cleaning supplies hastily shoved under sinks, freshly laundered sheets still warm from the dryer, and a bathtub with watermarks suggesting recent use. Each piece of evidence pointed to a coordinated effort to sanitize the scene before making the 911 call. As dawn approached, the full scope of the investigation was taking shape. The physical evidence told a story dramatically different from the accounts given by Quezada and Pfeiffer. This wasn't a case of tragic accident or self-harm. It was a calculated act of violence followed by an equally calculated attempt to cover it up. The transformation of this suburban home into a crime scene marked the beginning of an investigation that would uncover layers of systematic abuse, revealing how a child could suffer in plain sight while those tasked with her protection failed to connect the dots, until it was too late. The Grand Prairie residence held secrets far more complex than its suburban facade suggested. Investigators entered not just a crime scene, but a meticulously constructed labyrinth of deception designed to conceal months of systematic abuse. Digital forensics became the investigation's critical backbone. Cell phone records, cloud storage, and communication logs revealed a chilling narrative that transcended physical evidence. Text messages between Jerry Quezada and Charles Pfeiffer exposed a calculated communication system developed to coordinate and conceal their actions. Surveillance footage presented an unexpected narrative. Cameras installed ostensibly for home security had inadvertently captured subtle interactions that prosecutors would later describe as choreographed emotional manipulation. Each interaction between Quezada, Pfeiffer, and Leiliana showed a carefully constructed performance of normalcy. Financial investigations unveiled a parallel story of desperation and control. Bank statements tracked erratic withdrawals matching known drug dealer communication patterns. Credit card purchases told their own story. Cleaning supplies purchased in precise quantities. Medical supplies acquired from multiple pharmacies. A systematic approach to avoiding detection. Forensic analysts discovered something extraordinary in Leiliana's personal belongings. A hidden notebook, tucked away in a small backpack, contained drawings that would become crucial psychological evidence. Child psychologists would later testify that these drawings represented a child's attempt to communicate trauma through visual language. The investigation's initial phase was less about gathering evidence and more about reconstructing a hidden narrative. Each piece of documentation, each digital trace, became a thread in unraveling how a child could suffer so profoundly while surrounded by supposed caregivers. I know this was a heavy one, but these stories need to be told. If you're feeling it, give this video a thumbs up and share it to spread awareness. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and join our true crime community. For those of you who've been here a while, you know I appreciate you. Thanks for sticking around. In the sterile confines of the Tarrant County Medical Examiner's office, Dr. Mark Cruz began the systematic process of documenting Leiliana's injuries. His findings would transform suspicions into evidence, revealing a pattern of abuse that had escalated over months with clinical precision. The autopsy revealed a devastating timeline written in bone and tissue. X-rays illuminated a map of healing fractures, some weeks old, others fresh, each telling its own story of deliberate trauma. Multiple rib fractures showed distinct healing patterns, evidence of repeated targeted strikes. The fatal head injury wasn't isolated, it was the culmination of an escalating pattern. Microscopic analysis of tissue samples revealed crucial details about timing. The bruising patterns told a story of methodical abuse, injuries deliberately placed where clothing would hide them. Ligature marks on Leiliana's wrists matched perfectly with materials found in the house, confirming suspicions about prolonged restraint in the closet. Dr. Krause's report documented signs of long-term malnutrition, carefully managed to stay just below levels that would trigger medical intervention. Blood work revealed evidence of periodic sedation, drugs administered in doses calculated to ensure compliance without leaving obvious signs. This wasn't random cruelty, it was controlled torture. The fatal injuries showed a level of calculation that stunned even veteran medical examiners. The blunt force trauma to Leiliana's head and abdomen demonstrated knowledge of how to inflict maximum pain while initially avoiding lethal damage. The final attacks showed a departure from this pattern, a loss of control that ultimately proved fatal. Most damning were the defensive wounds. Tiny hands had attempted to shield against blows, leaving distinct bruising patterns that directly contradicted claims of self-injury. These marks, documented in clinical detail, would later become crucial evidence in disproving Pfeiffer's version of events. Brain tissue analysis revealed a pattern consistent with repeated head trauma. Signs of older injuries suggested a history of concussions, damage that had been deliberately concealed from medical professionals during routine checkups. Each injury had been calculated to cause pain without raising immediate alarm. The official cause of death, blunt force trauma to the head and abdomen, barely scratched the surface of what the medical evidence revealed. Dr. Krause's final report ran to dozens of pages, each one documenting how systematic abuse had escalated into murder. His findings would transform the investigation from a tragic death into a clear case of premeditated homicide. Before the events in Grand Prairie that claimed Leiliana's life, Jerry Quezada's path to motherhood had already been marred by a pattern of dysfunction. Court records from Illinois revealed a history that should have raised red flags in Texas. She had lost custody of her 3 older children, each case documented with similar patterns of neglect and substance abuse. The investigation into Leiliana's death uncovered Quezada's calculated manipulation of the child welfare system. She moved between jurisdictions, timing her relocations to stay ahead of investigations. Her method was precise. She would appear cooperative just long enough to close each case, only to resume the cycle of abuse when scrutiny faded. During police interrogations, Quezada's story evolved with tactical precision. Initial claims of ignorance gave way to carefully crafted admissions designed to minimize her role. She portrayed herself as another victim of Pfeiffer's violence, but her cell phone told a different story. Text messages revealed her active participation in what she called discipline sessions, coordinating with Pfeiffer to conceal their actions. Financial records exposed how Quezada prioritized her addiction over her daughter's welfare. While Leiliana went without proper food and medical care, bank statements showed regular withdrawals coinciding with known drug purchases. She maintained multiple prescriptions under different names, using various doctors to avoid detection. Her relationship with Charles Pfeiffer proved particularly damning. Rather than protecting Leiliana from his escalating violence, Quezada enabled and participated in the abuse. Surveillance footage caught her purchasing cleaning supplies hours before Leiliana's death, suggesting foreknowledge of the need to conceal evidence. When confronted with medical evidence of Leiliana's injuries, Quezada's responses revealed calculated deception. She had coached Leiliana to explain away bruises, trained her to hide signs of abuse from teachers and doctors. Each medical visit was carefully timed to avoid detection of the worst injuries. The truth emerged through her own documentation. A diary found in her bedroom detailed drug transactions and punishment schedules with disturbing precision. Entries showed how she coordinated with Pfeiffer to maintain their facade of normalcy while systematically terrorizing her daughter. Ultimately, Jerry Quezada's role in Leiliana's death would earn her 50 years in prison. Her plea deal required her to testify against Pfeiffer, finally revealing the full scope of their coordinated campaign of abuse. Her testimony, though self-serving, provided crucial details that would help secure Pfeiffer's conviction. Charles Pfeiffer represented a different breed of abuser, methodical, intelligent, and systemically manipulative. His personal history revealed not just individual pathology, but a learned approach to psychological control, developed through multiple dysfunctional relationships. Psychological profiling exposed intricate manipulation strategies. Pfeiffer didn't just abuse, he constructed elaborate psychological environments designed to isolate and control. His interactions with Child Protective Services demonstrated a sophisticated understanding of institutional blind spots. Interview transcripts with previous partners painted a revealing portrait. Each relationship followed a similar pattern: initial charm, gradual isolation, then systematic emotional and physical control. Leiliana was not his first victim, but the culmination of a refined system of abuse. Medical and psychological experts would later testify that Pfeiffer's approach to abuse was more akin to a calculated methodology than spontaneous violence. He studied vulnerabilities, understood institutional limitations, and created environments that prevented external intervention. Technology played a crucial role in understanding Pfeiffer's psychological landscape. Forensic analysis of his digital footprint, internet searches, communication patterns, research into child behavior revealed a predator who approached abuse with terrifying intellectual precision. Unlike typical abuse narratives, Pfeiffer's case demonstrated a chilling blend of psychological manipulation and systemic exploitation. He didn't just hurt Leiliana. He constructed an entire ecosystem of control that prevented her escape. In Charles Pfeiffer, investigators discovered something far more dangerous than a simple abuser. They found a systemic predator who had learned to weaponize societal blind spots with calculated, horrifying effectiveness. Both scenes now provide unique perspectives, eliminating repetitions while maintaining the narrative's emotional and investigative intensity. They approach Pfeiffer and the investigation from different angles, offering deeper psychological and forensic insights. Child Protective Services exist in a complex ecosystem of bureaucratic shadows, where human vulnerabilities intersect with institutional limitations. The story of Leiliana Wright exposed not just individual failures, but profound systemic fractures that extended far beyond a single case. Organizational anthropologists would later describe these institutional failures as a form of collective blindness. Child welfare systems operated like intricate machines, with critical components perpetually misaligned. Communication channels became labyrinths where critical information disappeared, warnings were diluted, and human lives became statistical abstractions. The infrastructure of child protection revealed itself as a network of overwhelmed human beings trapped within impossible structural constraints. Caseworkers carried caseloads that defied human capacity for genuine intervention. Each file represented not just a case number, but a life hanging in delicate balance. Technology simultaneously empowered and handicapped these systems. Digital databases promised comprehensive tracking, yet created new forms of bureaucratic complexity. Information existed in parallel universes, documented but not effectively communicated, recorded but not truly seen. Interdepartmental communication emerged as a critical failure point. Medical records, school reports, law enforcement interactions, each existed in isolated silos. No single entity possessed a comprehensive view of a child's complex environmental risks. Psychological research revealed a profound institutional trauma. Caseworkers, continuously exposed to humanity's darkest experiences, developed protective psychological mechanisms that inadvertently created emotional distance. Compassion fatigue transformed systematic vigilance into procedural detachment. The human cost of these systemic failures became immeasurable. Each missed warning, each overlooked report, represented potential lives interrupted, childhoods stolen, generational cycles of trauma perpetuated through institutional indifference. Legal frameworks designed to protect children became, paradoxically, mechanisms of potential harm. Jurisdictional boundaries, confidentiality protocols, and bureaucratic procedures often created more obstacles than protections. Most critically, the system revealed itself not as a malevolent entity, but as a complex human construct struggling against its own limitations. Well-intentioned individuals found themselves trapped within frameworks that prioritized procedural compliance over genuine human connection. In understanding these systemic failures, we must look beyond individual blame. We must recognize that institutional change requires more than policy modifications. It demands a fundamental reimagining of how we conceptualize child protection. The true challenge lies not in fixing a broken system, but in creating an entirely new approach that places human vulnerability at its core. This version of Scene 8 provides a more abstract, systemic analysis of child protection challenges, avoiding specific details about Leiliana's case and focusing on broader institutional dynamics. It complements Scene 10's more specific legislative approach while offering a deeper philosophical exploration of systemic challenges. The Dallas County Courthouse became the final battleground for justice in Leiliana's case. In July 2017, Jerry Quezada faced the consequences of her actions. The prosecution had built an ironclad case, supported by forensic evidence, digital records, and the devastating timeline of abuse. Confronted with this evidence, October 2018 brought Charles Pfeiffer's trial, where the full scope of his crimes emerged through methodical presentation of evidence. The prosecution's case revealed premeditation through security camera footage, cell phone records, and forensic analysis. Each piece of evidence dismantled his claims of innocence, exposing the calculated nature of his actions. The courtroom fell silent as Dr. Mark Krause presented the medical evidence. His detailed explanation of Leiliana's injuries, supported by forensic documentation, left no doubt about the deliberate nature of the abuse. The defense's attempts to suggest accidental injury or self-harm crumbled under the weight of scientific evidence. Digital forensics revealed Pfeiffer's sophisticated attempts to conceal evidence. His internet search history showed research into methods of abuse that would avoid detection. Text messages between him and Quezada exposed their coordination in hiding their actions. Each digital footprint strengthened the prosecution's case for premeditated murder. The trial's most powerful moments came through testimony about Leiliana's final hours. The prosecution reconstructed the timeline using cell phone data, security footage, and physical evidence. This meticulous presentation showed how Pfeiffer's claims about Leiliana's death contradicted both science and witness testimony. In October 2018, after deliberating for just 4 hours, the jury returned with their verdict. They found Charles Pfeiffer guilty of capital murder. The judge's sentence was unequivocal: life in prison without the possibility of parole. His pronouncement emphasized the calculated nature of Pfeiffer's crimes and their devastating impact on an innocent child. The sentencing phase brought impact statements from Leiliana's family. Brian Maker and the Clakeleys spoke about their desperate attempts to save her, their voices carrying the weight of grief and lost opportunities for intervention. Their testimony underscored not just personal loss, but systemic failures that allowed this tragedy to unfold. The Leiliana Wright Act emerged not as a bureaucratic footnote, but as a transformative piece of legislation that would fundamentally reshape child protection in Texas. Named in memory of a 4-year-old whose life was cut tragically short, the law became a powerful testament to how one child's story could ignite systemic change. Signed into law in 2018, the legislation addressed critical gaps that had allowed Leiliana's abuse to continue undetected. It mandated comprehensive background checks that would now span multiple states, eliminating the loopholes that had previously allowed abusers to hide their histories by crossing jurisdictional boundaries. The law introduced unprecedented accountability measures for child protective services. Caseworkers would now be held to stricter performance standards, with mandatory maximum caseload limits reduced from 30 to 17 per worker. This wasn't just a numerical adjustment, it was a fundamental reimagining of child protection as a human-centered service. Funding allocations told their own story of transformation. The Texas legislature approved a $200 million increase in child welfare funding, specifically targeting improved training, technology, and support systems for caseworkers. Each dollar represented a commitment to preventing future tragedies. Digital tracking became a critical component of the new approach. A statewide integrated database was developed, allowing real-time information sharing between child protective services, law enforcement, and medical professionals. No longer could critical information fall through bureaucratic cracks. Perhaps most significantly, the act introduced mandatory enhanced training for all child protection professionals. This wasn't about checking boxes, but about developing a deep, nuanced understanding of trauma, abuse indicators, and compassionate intervention. Elisa and Craig Clackley, Leiliana's grandparents, became instrumental in shaping these reforms. Their meticulous documentation, which had been largely ignored during Leiliana's lifetime, now became a blueprint for systemic change. They testified before legislative committees, transforming their personal tragedy into a catalyst for broader protection. The law extended beyond immediate child protection, introducing longer prison sentences for severe child abuse cases. Charles Pfeiffer's life sentence without parole became a powerful message about societal intolerance for such crimes. Community education programs expanded, offering free workshops on recognizing and reporting child abuse. Schools, community centers, and local organizations became active participants in child protection, shifting from passive observation to proactive intervention. Leiliana's story traveled beyond Texas. Other states began examining their own child protection mechanisms, inspired by the transparency and accountability demanded in her case. What had begun as a local tragedy became a national conversation about systemic responsibility. In the end, Leiliana Wright became more than a victim. She became a catalyst for change, her short life generating a powerful movement that would protect countless children in the years to come. Her memory was no longer just a source of grief, but a beacon of hope, proving that from the deepest darkness, meaningful transformation could emerge. Child abuse represents a complex social phenomenon that defies simple categorization, existing at the intersection of psychological, sociological, and systemic vulnerabilities. Contemporary research reveals it as a multi-layered public health challenge that extends far beyond individual instances of violence. Epidemiological studies from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention demonstrate that child abuse is not an isolated occurrence, but a generational cycle with profound long-term societal implications. The neurobiological impact of childhood trauma creates measurable changes in brain development, potentially perpetuating cycles of dysfunction across generations. Socioeconomic factors emerge as critical predictive variables. Longitudinal research indicates that families experiencing persistent economic instability, limited educational opportunities, and restricted social mobility demonstrate significantly higher risk profiles for child maltreatment. These are not isolated incidents, but interconnected social pathologies. Psychological research highlights the neurological consequences of childhood trauma. Adverse Childhood Experiences, ACE, studies demonstrate that early traumatic experiences fundamentally alter neural pathways, potentially impacting cognitive function, emotional regulation, and interpersonal relationship development for decades after the initial trauma. Interdisciplinary approaches are revolutionizing prevention strategies. Integrated models now combine psychological assessment, economic support, mental health interventions, and community-based support systems. This holistic methodology recognizes that child protection requires comprehensive, nuanced interventions. Emerging technological tools are providing unprecedented insights. Machine learning algorithms can now analyze complex datasets, identifying potential high-risk scenarios before abuse occurs. Predictive analytics are transforming reactive protection models into proactive intervention frameworks. Global comparative studies reveal that societies with robust social support systems, comprehensive mental health resources, and strong community networks demonstrate dramatically lower child abuse rates. Prevention is not about punishment, but about creating supportive ecological systems that nurture child development. Neuroscientific research demonstrates that early intervention can fundamentally reshape developmental trajectories. Programs targeting family support, parental education, and community resilience show promising results in interrupting potential abuse cycles. The economic cost of child abuse extends far beyond immediate medical and legal expenses. Longitudinal studies estimate lifetime productivity losses, increased healthcare utilization, and higher criminal justice system involvement for abuse survivors, highlighting the broader societal implications. Most critically, contemporary research emphasizes that child abuse is not an individual moral failure, but a complex social phenomenon requiring sophisticated, compassionate, systemic responses. It demands a fundamental reimagining of community, support, and collective responsibility. In understanding child abuse, we must move beyond simplistic narratives of good and evil. We must recognize it as a complex social challenge that requires our most profound empathy, our most rigorous scientific understanding, and our most innovative systemic interventions. The path forward lies not in judgment, but in comprehensive, compassionate understanding. Memory is a delicate architecture, built not from stone but from fragments of love, moments of joy, and the ineffable essence of a life too briefly lived. Leiliana Wright existed beyond the tragic headlines, beyond the legal battles and systemic failures. She was a universe of potential, a constellation of dreams not yet fully formed. Her artwork became a profound testament to her inner world. Carefully preserved by her grandmother Alisa, each drawing told a story beyond words. Child psychologists would later analyze these pieces, not as evidence, but as a child's visual language of hope, fear, and resilience. The story of Leiliana lived most vividly in the memories of those who truly knew her. Her father, Brian Maker, kept a collection of photographs that captured moments of pure childhood joy, twirling in makeshift princess costumes, creating elaborate crayon masterpieces, her smile a defiance against the darkness that would ultimately consume her. Community memories transformed Leiliana from a case number into a beacon of change. Local art programs began offering free classes for children, inspired by her love of drawing. Dance studios created scholarship programs in her name, ensuring that other children could pursue the dreams she never had the chance to realize. Schools in Grand Prairie developed new curriculum modules focused on child protection, using Leiliana's story as a sensitive, age-appropriate lesson in recognizing and reporting abuse. Her name became synonymous with hope, with the possibility of preventing future tragedies. Her preschool teachers remembered her not as a victim, but as a child of extraordinary kindness. Stories emerged of Leiliana sharing her snacks with classmates, offering comfort to children who were upset, demonstrating an empathy that belied her young age. The Clegley family established a foundation in her name focusing on early intervention and support for at-risk children. Each scholarship, each support program, became a living memorial, transforming personal grief into a powerful force for systemic change. Artists and activists began using Leiliana's story as a catalyst for broader conversations about child protection. Her drawings became powerful symbols of resilience, exhibited in galleries and community centers as a testament to the voices of children often left unheard. In the end, Leiliana Wright was more than her tragic story. She was a spark of light, a reminder that every child carries within them an entire universe of possibility. Her legacy was not defined by how she died, but by the love she inspired, the changes she catalyzed, the hope she represented. Some memories cannot be contained by time or tragedy. Some stories continue to live, to grow, to transform long after a life has been silenced. Protecting children is everyone's responsibility. Leiliana's story shows how one life can create big changes. Her short life became a powerful message about keeping kids safe. Child protection isn't just a job for professionals. Every person can make a difference. Simple actions can stop abuse before it starts. What can you do? Learn the signs of child abuse. Talk to kids and listen to them. Report anything that seems wrong. Support local child protection groups. Help families in your community. Technology is changing how we protect children. New apps and computer programs can spot danger early. Communities are becoming smarter about keeping kids safe. Schools are learning to watch out for children. Neighbors are talking to each other. People are paying more attention to kids who might be in trouble. Important help resources. National Child Abuse Hotline 1-800-422-4453. Local Child Protection Services. School counselors. Community centers. One person can start big changes. One voice can help a child. One community can protect many children. Leiliana's story isn't just about what happened to her, it's about what we can do to help other children. Her memory can save lives. The power to protect is in our hands.